All right, in this next module, I want to briefly touch on the regulation of the pharmaceutical industry because it's one of the most heavily regulated of all industries. Now, governments regulate most firms for worker safety and health concerns, but pharmaceutical products face further oversight by the FDA. The FDA review has become a really lengthy and complex process. So where's my laser pointer? There she is. Okay, so following the discovery stage, and this is the stage during which the new chemicals are synthesized, um, the firm will conduct preclinical animal studies involving short-term toxicity and safety tests. And then after discovery and testing, the drug firm next files an application with the FDA to conduct clinical trials. And if approved, the trials are conducted in 3 phases. In phase 1, you have small groups of healthy volunteers, and this phase focuses on safety and appropriate dosage. Phase 2, these are trials that involve a larger number of subjects, often maybe several hundred, who have the targeted condition, and they concentrate on the drug's efficacy. And then phase 3, these trials are the ones we typically hear about. These are usually conducted on thousands of patients in different settings, generally RCTs, so that safety and efficacy can be determined more precisely in a broader population. Now, if all 3 trials indicate safety and efficacy, and the drug safety is also supported by long-term animal studies, the company will then submit a new drug application, or an NDA, which contains all the data and the results. They submit that to the FDA. That FDA review usually takes about a year, more than a year. So the total development time from discovery to FDA review and approval stands right now at about 14 years. And these requirements, 14 years is a long time, these requirements provoke considerable controversy, and there's obvious trade-offs between the goals of, on the one hand, protecting the consumer, and on the other hand, rapid innovation. And the economic approach is to weigh the gains in safety and efficacy against the cost of delaying patients from utilizing useful products. Economists will also express concern about the potential stifling of innovation that can be caused by regulation, and also its adverse effects on competition. These are all trade-offs that we're thinking about right now in April 2020, as we have national and even global conversations about developing and testing a vaccine for COVID-19. So in the life cycle of drug development, there's a few important things to note. One, it can be hard to find a promising new chemical in the first place. And then if you find a promising chemical, only a fifth of those drugs that enter phase 1 trials actually make it to phase 3. It can cost around $500 million or more to bring a drug to market. So when you hear proponents of patents and patent regulation talking about this being a risky and expensive process, it really is. It can contribute to the concentration or the reduced concentration in the market itself. The total process, as I mentioned, can take from 12 to 14 years. Only about 1 of 5 to 10,000 chemical compounds screened actually become a new drug. And even of those that make it to the marketing stage, only 1 in 3 are profitable. Once it's approved for sale, the pharmaceutical company has a temporary legal monopoly that's protected by a patent, and this allows them to try and recoup those millions of dollars spent on the research and testing. As I mentioned, only a top third of the drugs pay for themselves. Only 1 in 3 are profitable. And after that time is up, other companies can produce the same drugs cheaply, generics, and the profits decrease sharply. So if we were in class together, this is the point in which I would stop and we would talk about the upside of strong patents and the downside of strong patents and weigh those pros and cons together. But for this online lecture, I will just give you some of my thoughts on those. The upside of strong patents being obviously the incentive to develop new drugs. The downside of strong patents being that customers have to pay monopoly prices for a longer period, less incentive for further innovation by the same company, and also legal barriers to subsequent innovation by another company. Another way to think about this is, well, let me back up for a second. So in macroeconomics, or we call it voodoo economics, there is something called the Laffer curve. And Arthur Laffer came up with this idea that, let me see if I can get my pen. Here we go. He drew this famous curve called the Laffer curve that shows the relationship between higher taxes and tax revenue. So he drew a curve that looks something like this, where he had tax rate, oops, kitchen noises, tax rate and tax revenue. Some cursive to make this go faster. Okay, and his idea about the relationship between tax rate and tax revenue is that as the government increases the tax rate, obviously the government will collect more in tax revenue. But if you increase the tax rate beyond a certain threshold, tax revenue will actually start to decline, because if you're taxing people up to, I don't know, 80% of their income, they're just going to work less for many reasons, or at least find ways to hide the money that they're earning from the government. And so, also one fun fact for the econ history nerds is that Arthur Laffer is reputed to have drawn this curve for the first time on a paper napkin at a dinner with Dick Cheney and Donald Rumsfeld at the Washington Hotel in 1974. So another economist, Alex Tabarrok, drew a similar curve on a virtual napkin, just the throwback. And he argues that there's a similar relationship between patent strength and innovation, and that beyond a certain point, if you increase patent strength, you encourage innovation, but beyond a certain point, greater protection for intellectual property can actually cause less innovation. And in his words, he says, in fields where innovation is a cumulative process, restricting patents would actually cause firms to lose some of their monopoly rights, but they would gain the opportunity to use the innovations of others. So the result would be greater total innovation. So in sum, there are trade-offs involved in patent laws, and the relationship between patent strength or patent length and innovation is not necessarily a linear one.